Welcome back. Tonight, we explore the darkest, most hidden secrets buried inside Call of Duty Zombies. The conspiracies, the tragedies, and the lore that even the most dedicated players have never fully uncovered. Drop a comment below and tell me where you're listening from tonight, and what games you want me to cover next, and subscribe if this helps you sleep. The accident that started everything. Nacht der Untoten, the very first Zombies map, was never supposed to exist as an official feature. Treyarch developers had been playing a private internal prototype after hours for their own amusement. Just a simple bunker, just a few walls, just soldiers with rifles trying to survive against shambling corpses in the dark. The mode had no name, no formal design document, and no narrative purpose. It was stress relief for a team that had been pouring everything into the World at War campaign. When leadership saw how much fun the team was having, the decision was made to slip it into the game at the last minute, buried behind the campaign completion requirement, so it would feel like a hidden reward rather than a headline feature. There were no cutscenes, no story, no explanation for anything. Just the dark, the boards over the windows, the endless groaning, and the message. You drove them deep into the heart of the Reich. You thought they were dead. You were wrong. That was it. No lore, no character names, nothing. And somehow that absence of explanation made it more terrifying than anything a scripted scene could have delivered. The real place that inspired the horror. The map Der Riese, which translates from German as the Giant, is directly based on a real historical location. The actual Der Riese was a network of underground Nazi facilities located in Lower Silesia, in what is now Wrocław, Poland. The real complex was almost entirely constructed beneath the earth, a vast subterranean warren of tunnels, laboratories, and production facilities built by forced labor. And according to persistent historical research and wartime documentation, the real Der Riese was the alleged development site for one of Nazi Germany's most secretive and terrifying Wunderwaffe projects, a device called Die Glocke, which translates as the bell. Die Glocke was reportedly a bell-shaped apparatus that researchers believe may have been an anti-gravity engine, a time displacement device, or both simultaneously. Documents recovered after the war describe strange experiments involving rotating mercury and electromagnetic fields, and testimony from surviving workers described symptoms consistent with extreme radiation poisoning. Treyarch pulled directly from this history when designing their fictional version of the facility. The in-game Waffenfabrik der Riese, meaning arms factory of the Giant, sits atop this legacy of darkness and real-world terror, giving the fiction roots in something genuinely unsettling. The night Fluffy became something else. At the heart of the original COD Zombies mythology is a moment of devastating cruelty disguised as a scientific test. Dr. Ludwig Maxis, the head of Group 935, had a daughter named Samantha. Her mother had died during childbirth, so Maxis had raised her alone, always keeping her close to his work, perhaps too close, given what Group 935 was experimenting on. Samantha had a dog named Fluffy. Fluffy was pregnant. One night, Richthofen and Maxis attempted a teleportation test using the matter transference device at the Der Riese facility, and Fluffy was placed inside the chamber for Test 6. The test failed catastrophically. Fluffy was teleported and returned as something completely unrecognizable, a scorched, snarling supernatural creature with burning eyes and the ability to generate fire. Not a dog anymore, something made of darkness, an element 115, and whatever horrible energy lived on the other side of those teleporters. Samantha, hearing the commotion, ran into the chamber to check on Fluffy. Maxis ran in after his daughter, and Richthofen, seeing his opportunity, locked them both inside the chamber. Fluffy, now the very first hellhound, turned on them. The radio transmissions scattered throughout Der Riese capture the chaos of that night. Maxis screaming for Samantha, Samantha calling for her dog, and then silence. Because Fluffy was also pregnant, the hellhounds that spawn in later rounds aren't random supernatural creatures. They're Fluffy's children. You've been killing the offspring of Samantha Maxis's beloved pet every time a dog round begins. Samantha's mother died giving birth to her, before she became the disembodied voice tormenting players from beyond the Moon Pyramid device, before she became the child god controlling zombie hordes across the globe. Samantha Maxis was just a little girl whose father worked too much. According to lore documented across the Black Ops timeline, Samantha was born on November 5th, 1934, and her mother died during that very delivery. Maxis had no one to help raise her and no one to tell him he was making mistakes. He brought Samantha into his laboratory. He let her sit near experiments involving reanimated corpses and alien elements. He allowed Richthofen, a man who would later be revealed as an Illuminati operative performing secret experiments on children, to have unsupervised access near his daughter. The in-game audio logs and timeline documents describe Richthofen conducting experiments on Samantha for reasons that are never fully specified, but are clearly sinister. He hated her. He hated her attachment to Maxis and what it did to Maxis's focus. And by the time Maxis realized how deep Richthofen's hostility truly ran, it was already far too late. Group 935 was always compromised. Dr. Ludwig Maxis formed Group 935 on May 10, 1931, as an international scientific research organization. The stated mission was entirely benevolent: improve the human condition, advance human knowledge, push the boundaries of what was scientifically possible. He built something genuinely impressive: a sprawling network of research stations across Germany, Japan, Russia, and beyond, staffed by some of the era's brightest minds. But from the very beginning, the organization was infiltrated. Richthofen had joined the Illuminati on August 30th, 1925, years before Group 935 even existed. When Maxis invited him to join, Richthofen accepted not out of scientific passion, but as a strategic placement, acting on behalf of the Illuminati's interests. Everything Richthofen contributed to Group 935, the teleportation experiments, the Element 115 research, the Wonder Weapon program, was filtered through an agenda Maxis never knew about. When Richthofen teleported himself to the moon and encountered the Moon Pyramid device for the first time, the Illuminati's investment paid off. The corruption he received from the MPD aligned perfectly with what the Apothecons, the ancient, extra-dimensional entities behind the Shadow Man, had been planning for centuries. Group 935 was never just a research group. It was a vehicle, and Richthofen was the key in its ignition. Element 115 is real, the element at the center of the entire zombies mythology. The glowing, pulsating space rock that reanimates the dead and powers teleporters and wonder weapons is based on an actual element on the periodic table. Element 115 was first synthesized in a laboratory in 2004 by a team of Russian and American scientists at the Joint Institute for Nuclear Research in Dubna, Russia. It was initially given the temporary placeholder name Unun Pentium, before being officially named Moscovium in 2016. In the real world, it is extraordinarily unstable, scientists have only ever produced around 100 atoms of it under highly controlled conditions, and each atom decays within milliseconds of creation. It cannot be found in nature. It cannot be held in a jar. It has never glowed, whispered to anyone, or reanimated a corpse. But the reason Treyarch chose this specific element for their mythology is far more interesting than simple science. In the 1980s, a man named Bob Lazar made explosive public claims that he had worked at a classified facility near Area 51 called S4, where he allegedly reverse-engineered alien spacecraft. He specifically claimed that these spacecraft were powered by a stable isotope of element 115, a version of the element that, unlike our synthesized atoms, was reportedly large enough to hold in your hand, dense and weighty, and capable of bending space-time itself as a fuel source. Treyarch incorporated Lazar's conspiracy theory almost wholesale into their lore. The Group 935 deposits of element 115 scattered across Derrisa, Shir no Numa, and the moon aren't just alien space rocks. They're the universe's fabric, the binding material of reality itself. And according to Max's in the lore, if the proper amounts of 115 are not maintained across dimensions, space-time could unravel entirely. What 115 does to living people. Most players interact with element 115 as a game mechanic. It powers the Pack-a-Punch machine. It's referenced in weapon names. It's the glowing orange-purple meteor you shoot for a hidden song. But the lore documents what prolonged 115 exposure actually does to a human being, and it is not pleasant. The early symptoms include short-term memory loss, paranoia, and psychosis. Subjects begin seeing and hearing things that are not there. Their behavior becomes erratic and violent. Richthofen's own research logs describe his 3 primary test subjects: Nikolai Belinsky, Takeo Masaki, and the Mexican spy Pablo Marinos, undergoing radical personality changes after exposure. Nikolai stopped functioning without vodka because Richthofen had developed a serum made primarily from vodka, to which Nikolai responded to stimuli after injection, effectively rewiring his psychology around alcohol dependency. Takeo was reduced to sitting on the floor reciting Japanese proverbs over and over, lost in whatever internal world the element had carved out of his consciousness. Pablo Marinos was eventually accidentally killed during experimentation. His replacement, Tank Dempsey, had his intellect significantly diminished per Richthofen's own notes. His intellect seems low, but his will is strong. Overexposure to 115, beyond the point of psychosis and personality disintegration, leads to death and then reanimation. Everyone exposed long enough becomes the enemy you're fighting. The teddy bear knows something. Scattered across virtually every zombie's map, appearing in corners and behind boxes and sitting in unexpected places, is a stuffed teddy bear. Players have debated for years what the teddy bear means. The most accepted interpretation in the community is that the teddy bear represents Samantha Maxis herself. In the lore, Samantha had a favorite stuffed animal that she carried with her, and after she became fused with the Moon Pyramid device and took control of the zombie hordes, her presence and emotional state began bleeding into the physical environments she was influencing. The bear watching from the shadows is Samantha watching. When you pick up the mystery box and the teddy bear appears instead of a weapon, the box moving to another location, that is Samantha deciding she doesn't feel like giving you what you want. In Kino de Toten's teleporter rooms, one of the areas you can be transported to is what appears to be a child's bedroom destroyed and covered in blood, with a teddy bear sitting in the center of the carnage. That room is widely understood to represent Samantha's room, not as it was, but as she felt about it after everything was taken from her. On the wall of Dereza, a distinct shadow shaped like an upright teddy bear is cast against the brickwork. In the fly-trap teleporter room, there is a massive teddy bear holding a Bowie knife. Everywhere Samantha's influence reaches, the bear appears. It's her signature, left like a fingerprint on every map she touched. The knocking in the crates. In a dressing room behind a zombie barricade in Kino de Toten, there is a stack of crates sitting next to a clothes rack. If you stand quietly near them and listen carefully, you can hear a sound coming from inside. Knocking. Not zombie groaning. Not ambient map noise. Deliberate, rhythmic knocking, as though someone is trapped inside the crates and trying to get out. You cannot interact with the crates. No quest involves them. Nothing explains who is knocking or why. The sound was discovered years after the game's release by players pausing combat to listen to the map's ambient audio more carefully, and it has never been officially acknowledged or explained by Treyarch. Theories have circulated for years. Some believe it is a zombie locked inside before the map begins. Something sealed away before the outbreak rather than after it. Others think it could be a survivor, a scientist who made it to the theater and hid themselves in the only container they could find. A few theories in the community suggest it could be Peter McCain, the American spy who is found hanged in Shinonuma, somehow still alive or undead, and transported to Kino through means that aren't explained anywhere. The developers have never spoken about it. The knocking continues regardless of round, regardless of how long you've been playing, regardless of whether anyone is alive to hear it. The man hanged at the swamp, in the central hut of Shinonuma, the swamp of death. There is a body hanging from the rafters. Not a zombie. A man who hanged himself, or was hanged, before the game begins. His name is Peter McCain, and he was an American OSS spy who had successfully infiltrated Group 935 under the cover name Peter. His mission had been to document everything Group 935 was doing with Element 115, report back to his CIA handler, a man named Cornelius Purnell, and identify any weaknesses in the operation that could be exploited. According to the timeline, Richthofen became suspicious of McCain and began monitoring him. Peter was eventually outed as a spy and captured before he could transmit his findings. The Marines sent to extract him, led by a young Tank Dempsey, arrived at the Verrucht asylum too late. Dempsey rushed ahead of his squad and was captured, his entire unit killed. Peter, knowing he had been compromised and knowing what Group 935 did to people they needed to keep quiet, was apparently moved to the Shinonuma facility before any rescue could reach him. His hang body is what the Ultimus crew finds when they arrive at the swamp. In the Black Ops 3 remaster of Shinonuma, there is an additional audio Easter egg accessible by interacting with the map's fishing hut, playing Samantha's lullaby, a haunting melody that feels profoundly out of place in a location associated with a man's violent death. The asylum was already broken before the zombies arrived. Verrucht, which translates from German as crazy or insane, is the second zombies map, and it is set in what appears to be a mental asylum. The building shows signs of extreme violence and deterioration that predate the zombie outbreak. Walls are covered in blood. Cells are destroyed. Equipment is shattered. This is not zombie damage. The architecture and distribution of the violence tells a different story. The asylum was already a place of suffering before Group 935 ever arrived. It was converted into one of the organization's experimental facilities, and the patients who were already there when the conversion happened were never evacuated. According to law documents, Dempsey's Marine Recon team was sent into Verrückt specifically to extract Peter McCain, and they encountered changed individuals who were in various states between human and zombie. People who had been exposed to element 115 in dosages that were too low to kill them outright, but high enough to destroy whatever was left of them. The Verrückt that players explore is a graveyard of two catastrophes layered on top of each other. The one that was already there before the science arrived, and the one the science caused. The theatre that swallowed decades, Kino der Toten, the cinema of the dead, is the map that introduced most players to the Black Ops era of zombies. It is set in an abandoned theatre in West Berlin, and on the surface it feels like a stylish but straightforward survival map. But the lore embedded in its walls is remarkably dense. The theatre was used by Group 935 as a facility to demonstrate their teleportation technology to the German High Command. Maxis had promised the Nazi government access to their weapons research and the reanimated undead in exchange for continued funding, and Kino was to be the stage of that demonstration. When Maxis was killed at Der Riese and the organization collapsed, the demonstration never happened. The theatre was abandoned with its equipment still installed, teleporters mid-construction, film reel projectors loaded with Maxis's own recorded logs, and Nazi-era propaganda interspersed with Group 935 documentation. What's darker is the timeline. The Ultimus crew arrives at Kino on October 28, 1963. Over 15 years after the teleporter malfunction at Der Riese sent them through time. 15 years passed in the outside world while they bounced through dimensions. The Cold War had settled into its paranoid rhythm. Kennedy was being assassinated in Dallas that same month, and 4 soldiers from 1945 were fighting zombies in a Berlin theatre that had been waiting for them for 2 decades. The film reels Maxis left behind. Hidden throughout Kino der Toten are up to 3 film reels, obtainable only by being teleported to specific rooms that the map's teleporter randomly selects from a pool of 4 possibilities. These reels can be inserted into a projector in the Pack-a-Punch room, where they play short recordings made by Ludwig Maxis himself. They are fragmentary, brief, disorienting clips of a man who was clearly deteriorating. In the recordings, Maxis speaks about his research, about the nature of element 115, and about things he claims to have seen and heard that suggest the element had begun affecting his own mind long before Richthofen made his final move. There is a clinical distance in his voice that occasionally fractures into something that sounds like fear and then reassembles itself. Each reel is a piece of a man who was brilliant, who genuinely believed he was working for the betterment of humanity, and who was being slowly consumed from the inside out by the thing he was studying. Manipulated by a colleague, watched by his daughter, and completely unaware that the organization he had built his life around was a coffin he had constructed himself. Manhattan down. In one of the back rooms of Kino der Toten, scrambled across the letters on the ground, is the phrase Manhattan down. It is not part of any quest. It is not explained by any character. The message is simply there, written on the floor in a room you can only reach by being teleported, which means it was designed to be seen by people paying close attention and not by people sprinting through the map. The prevailing interpretation is that it is a reference to the Manhattan Project, the classified American government program that developed the first nuclear weapons during World War II. The connection to zombies lore runs deeper than a simple Easter egg. Group 935 was aware of American nuclear research. The Nazis had their own nuclear programs. And Element 115, which underpins all of Zombies mythology, occupies a parallel space in the story to nuclear technology. Another energy source discovered through wartime desperation. Another force that reshaped history. Another thing humanity reached for without fully understanding what they were grabbing. Manhattan Down sits on that floor as a piece of bleak commentary, written in a place where you have to be lucky to even find it. The portraits in the hall. In the upstairs hallway of Kino der Toten, there are 4 large painted portraits hanging on the wall. They depict the 4 members of the Ultimis crew, Richthofen, Dempsey, Nikolai, and Takeo. This is deeply strange when you actually stop to think about it. The theatre was abandoned in the late 1940s. These characters were supposed to have arrived in 1963, over a decade after the theatre was sealed. Who painted these portraits? When were they commissioned? How would anyone have known what these 4 people looked like well enough to produce large, detailed, framed paintings? And why would Group 935 commission portraits of what were, at the time, Richthofen's test subjects, prisoners and guinea pigs, not heroes? The game does not explain any of this. What makes it stranger is that in the same area, players can find a second set of portraits of unidentified figures, and among them is a 5th portrait that has fallen from the wall and lies face down on the floor. Nobody knows who the 5th portrait depicts. Theories range from Pablo Marinos, the Mexican spy who was Richthofen's original test subject before being accidentally killed, to Peter McCain, to Cornelius Purnell. The portrait is face down, which suggests intentionality. Someone or something put it that way, and the game has never told anyone why. What Richthofen actually did on the moon. Before any player ever touched a zombies map, before the outbreak at Der Riese, before Fluffy's test failure, there was a moment that changed the entire trajectory of the COD Zombies universe. Richthofen was conducting human teleportation trials. The subjects were arriving at their destinations dead, or in states worse than death. Maxis was growing frustrated with the lack of results and increasingly diverted funding away from Richthofen's teleportation research toward the Wonder Weapon program instead. Furious and desperate to prove his work had value, Richthofen volunteered himself as a test subject. He stepped into the teleporter and activated it himself. He had intended to be transported to the Der Riese mainframe. Instead, something went wrong, or something went exactly as someone planned. Richthofen was transported directly to the moon. There, in a facility that wouldn't be officially discovered for years, he found the Moon Pyramid device, a massive ancient artifact of Apothicon origin, built by extra-dimensional entities called Keepers, and placed on Earth's moon thousands of years before humanity existed. Richthofen touched it. The device electrocuted him and established a direct link between his mind and the Apothicons, the ancient cosmic enemies of all organic life. From that moment forward, Richthofen began hearing voices. He didn't recognize them as manipulation. He thought they were inspiration. He returned to Earth and from the moon's scar still burning in his mind, began quietly reshaping everything around him to serve a plan that wasn't even fully his own. The teleporter sends you through time by accident. One of the most crucial and often overlooked details in the original Zombies timeline is that Richthofen never intended to travel through time. His obsession was with spatial teleportation, moving matter from one place to another. Time displacement was a side effect that emerged only when the Wunderwaffe DG2, One of Group 935's most powerful wonder weapons was discharged inside the teleporter at Der Riese in 1945, overloading the system and creating a temporal distortion. The Ultimis crew was flung not just through space, but through 18 years of time, landing in 1963. Richthofen lost his research diary in the chaos, which would later be recovered by Soviet forces after Group 935's dissolution. A diary that contained every detail of his grand scheme and would eventually fall into the wrong hands repeatedly across the timeline. The accidental time travel also separated the crew from any possibility of simply returning to fix things. They couldn't go back and undo the outbreak. They couldn't rescue Samantha. They couldn't warn Maxis. Everything that came after, Kino, Ascension, Shangri-La, Moon, was a consequence of an accident inside a teleporter. A chain reaction caused by firing the wrong weapon in the wrong room at the wrong moment. The map that happens at the Pentagon. 5 is one of Black Ops' most peculiar zombies offerings because it doesn't feature the Ultimis crew at all. Instead, it puts 4 of history's most famous Cold War figures together in a zombie outbreak at the Pentagon. John F. Kennedy, Richard Nixon, Robert McNamara, and Fidel Castro. The map takes place on November 6, 1963, the same week as Kino der Toten in the timeline, with the 2 events apparently unfolding simultaneously. The lore implication is alarming. While the Ultimis crew was surviving in an abandoned Berlin theater, the world's most powerful leaders were also fighting zombies at the highest levels of the American government, calling desperately on 3 red telephones to reach Dempsey, Nikolai, and Takeo for help. Those calls can actually be heard in the map. Kennedy, Nixon, Castro, and McNamara are running out of ammunition. They're being overrun. And the 3 super soldiers they're calling are just barely surviving themselves in a completely different country, fighting their own war. The Pentagon thief, the special enemy that steals the player's weapons, is in the lore one of Group 935's more disturbing experimental subjects. Not just a random creature, but something that was once a person who worked in that building. Richthofen bound their souls without telling them. One of the most chilling revelations in the later Black Ops games concerns something Richthofen did to his 3 test subjects long before they even knew what was happening. As part of an elaborate backup plan he was building in case his main scheme failed, Richthofen used their souls. He created something called the Elemental Shard by binding his own soul together with the souls of Dempsey, Nikolai, and Takeo, permanently fusing the 4 of them to the ether itself. This was not a procedure they consented to. This was not something they were awake for. They had no idea it had been done. The binding meant that no matter what happened to their physical bodies, no matter how many dimensions they traveled through, or how many times they died, their souls were tethered to something larger than themselves, something Richthofen controlled. It also meant that when the time came, in the Black Ops 3 maps, for Primus Richthofen to harvest the souls of Ultimis and preserve them in the summoning key, those souls could actually be captured. Their deaths in Der Eisendrache, Zetsubu no Shima, and Gorod Krovi were made possible because Richthofen had prepared them, spiritually and metaphysically, for harvesting. They were always his property. They just didn't know it. The death of Pablo Marinus. Before Tank Dempsey ever joined the group, Richthofen had 3 original test subjects at the Siberian facility. Nikolai Belinsky, a Soviet soldier, Takeo Masaki, a Japanese soldier, and Pablo Marinus, a Mexican spy. Pablo was the first. Pablo died because Richthofen accidentally killed him during a spleen removal procedure. The timeline records this matter-of-factly, without elaboration, which somehow makes it more disturbing. There was no accident involving element 115 or a teleporter. Richthofen was doing surgery on a live prisoner and made a mistake that killed his patient. Pablo was replaced by Dempsey, who had just been captured at Verrucht, and the experiment simply continued. Pablo Morenos exists in the zombies timeline as a ghost of a ghost, mentioned in records, his prison number used as part of the Mob of the Dead Easter egg decades later in the story, his position in the group filled by someone who would become one of the franchise's most beloved characters. He never appears in a game. He never gets a line of dialogue. He is a casualty in an accounting log, the first human being definitively killed by Richthofen's direct action, and the history of zombies moves forward without lingering on him. The Hellhound rounds are a grieving father's nightmare. Every time a Hellhound round begins, the screen going dark, the howling starting in the distance, the red-eyed burning creatures pouring in from every window. The lore context transforms it into something genuinely tragic. These are the children of Fluffy. Fluffy was pregnant when she was placed in the matter transference device. The mutation that the teleportation experiment caused didn't just destroy her. It carried through to her unborn puppies, and when the Hellhounds began appearing at Der Riese and throughout the later maps, they were Fluffy's litter, transformed into the same burning supernatural creatures their mother had become. Every bonus round of extra ammunition at the end of a Hellhound wave is the game giving you supplies in exchange for killing a dog's children. Maxis tried to call off the teleporter test that night. Richthofen proceeded anyway. Samantha ran into the chamber trying to protect Fluffy. And now the howling that echoes before every dog round is the echo of that night. The night a little girl lost her dog, a father lost his daughter, and the world lost something it didn't yet know it was going to miss. The Wunderwaffe's hidden cost. The Wunderwaffe, DG2, the chain lightning wonder weapon that can kill 10 zombies with a single bolt, is one of the most iconic weapons in zombies history. But buried in the mechanics of the original World at War version of Der Riese was a particularly brutal detail that most players experienced without understanding what it meant. If you were near a zombie when you shot it with the Wunderwaffe and the chain lightning arced back toward you, the shock would strip the effects of Juggernog from your character. Juggernog, the perk that doubled your health, the most critical survival perk in the game, would simply be gone. The icon would remain visible on your screen, tantalizing and deceptive, but the protective effect it granted would have been destroyed by the weapon's feedback. In practical terms, this meant that the most powerful weapon in the map could, if you weren't extremely careful, silently steal the thing keeping you alive. Treyarch fixed this in the Black Ops remaster of Der Riese, but in the original, thousands of players experienced sudden, inexplicable deaths at high rounds, not because of zombie damage, but because of the invisible residual effect of their own weapon. The Black Ops remaster made the Wunderwaffe turn gold when Pack-a-Punched, a small detail that nonetheless felt like a respectful acknowledgement of the weapon's mythological status. Samantha's voice was always laughing at you. In the original World at War and early Black Ops Zombies maps, the primary announcer voice, the voice that says max ammo when a power-up drops, that laughs when you die, that taunts you when the mystery box gives you the teddy bear, was always Samantha Maxis. This was not simply a stylistic choice, it was lore. Samantha, fused with the Moon Pyramid device and controlling the zombie hordes, was also watching every game. The power-up she dropped were deliberate acts of cruelty and generosity, moments where she chose to give the survivors a fighting chance before pulling the rug back out. The teddy bear appearing in the mystery box instead of a weapon wasn't bad luck. It was Samantha deciding she was done being generous. Her laughter when you go down isn't a sound effect. It's a character responding to something she finds funny. The entire framework of a zombies match. The escalating rounds, the eventual defeat, the power-ups appearing at just the right moment to keep hope alive before snuffing it out, is Samantha playing with her food. And when Richtofen completes his grand scheme at the end of Moon and switches souls with her, taking over as the demonic announcer, his voice replacing hers, that transition is the game's most dramatic lore moment, delivered entirely through a menu sound. Richtofen experimented on Samantha. The lore is not subtle about this. Richtofen's own research notes, accessible through the Black Ops timeline documents, state explicitly that he performed experiments on Samantha Maxis. The nature of those experiments is described as involving dangerous reality-warping divinium, the in-game name for Element 115, used specifically in the Primus timeline. He had access to her because Maxis, consumed by his work and reliant on Richtofen as a colleague, trusted him around his daughter. Whatever Richtofen was doing to Samantha in those sessions, exposing her to 115, observing her reactions, testing what the element did to a child's developing mind, was part of a strategy to understand the relationship between living consciousness and the ether. Samantha's eventual fusion with the Moon Pyramid device and her ability to control zombie hordes with her thoughts was not an accident of circumstance. It was, at least in part, a consequence of what had been done to her. The girl who became the voice in the machine, the child god directing armies of the dead, was shaped by experiments conducted by the man who trapped her there. The cycle of what Richtofen built in those sessions came back to haunt him in ways even he didn't anticipate. The moon was called Paris, in the development files of the moon map, the climactic Black Ops Zombies chapter set at Griffin Station, the Group 935 lunar base. The map's internal code name is Paris. According to notes and community research into the game's files, Paris was at some point the intended name or working title for what eventually became Moon. The name was carried all the way through to the final release, where it remains embedded in the map's code. Why Paris? There are theories, none confirmed. Some suggest a connection to the myth of Paris, the figure who sparked a catastrophic war through an act of theft, fitting for a map where Richtofen finally steals control of the ether. Others think it was simply an arbitrary placeholder that nobody got around to changing. What makes it notable is the reminder that Moon's status as a cataclysmic ending to the original Zombies arc was hard-won. The orange and black lunar surface where the crew finally confronted Samantha, where Richtofen completed his grand scheme and blew up the Earth, was once a project called Paris, named in the way all ambitious things begin, with a placeholder that means almost nothing, in the hands of people who haven't yet fully grasped what they're building. The Earth being destroyed was Maxis's fault. Players who only loosely followed the Black Ops story often attribute the destruction of Earth to Richtofen, the mad scientist who switched souls with Samantha and set off a chain of catastrophic events. But the actual detonation of Earth's atmosphere is Maxis's responsibility. After Richtofen completed his soul swap and took control of the zombie hordes on the moon, Dempsey, Nikolai, and Takeo were horrified by Richtofen's betrayal and desperately sought an ally. Maxis contacted them through the machinery of Griffin Station. He told them that to stop Richtofen's link to the ether, They needed to fire missiles at Earth, specifically 3 missiles from the moon's weapons systems targeting the planet below. Maxis presented this as the only way to sever Richthofen's power. The crew trusted him. They fired the missiles. Earth's ozone layer was catastrophically damaged. The planet's surface was shattered. Billions died. And Maxis, who had merged with Griffin Station's technology after his death and existed in a form of digital consciousness, had never intended to stop Richthofen's scheme. He intended to destroy the Earth so that Samantha's soul, which Richthofen now held in his control, would be free. He destroyed a planet to rescue his daughter. And when the dust settled, both his plan and Richthofen's had failed in different ways, and the world was rubble. The 4 crew members had been manipulated twice in the same evening. Mob of the Dead is actually a punishment. The sprawling Alcatraz map from Black Ops 2 is the most emotionally sophisticated zombies map in the entire franchise's history. And the reason it works so well as a horror experience is because the horror is specifically designed as justice. 4 mobsters, Salvatore De Luca, Michael Finn O'Leary, Billy Handsome, and Albert Weasel Arlington, are trapped in Alcatraz fighting zombies that never end, dying repeatedly, waking up in their cells with no memory of how they died, and trying to escape over and over again. This is not a random zombie outbreak. This is a supernatural punishment constructed specifically for them. In the real timeline, on the night of New Year's Eve, 1933, these 4 men had an escape plan. Arlington had designed a plane, a makeshift aircraft he called Icarus, and the others had agreed to help him build it. But before the escape could happen, the 3 others turned on Arlington. They had grown frustrated with him, resentful, contemptuous. They lured him to the roof and killed him. Shortly after, Finn, Sal, and Billy were executed in the electric chair for murder. The Shadow Man, the Apothecon entity that serves as one of the series' primary cosmic villains, contacted the warden of Alcatraz and instructed him to use the souls of all 4 men as the foundation of a pocket dimension, a supernatural prison. The warden electrocuted himself to follow them in, and the 4 mobsters woke up in Alcatraz, dead, unable to leave, with no memory of why they were there. The cycle continues unless Weasel, the one man who deserved to escape, kills the 3 who murdered him. Only then is the punishment complete. Brutus is the warden, the special enemy in Mob of the Dead, the enormous armored prison guard in a gas mask who disables perk machines and power stations, who seems indestructible and appears without warning, is revealed in Blood of the Dead to be the soul of the Alcatraz warden himself. Before his death, the warden had been hearing voices from the Shadowman for years, slowly being cultivated as an agent of the Apothecons. He was the one who physically constructed much of Alcatraz per the Shadowman's architectural instructions. The prison is described in lore as a temple of corrupted flesh, built according to specifications that served supernatural purposes its prisoners never understood. When the warden electrocuted himself, the Shadow Man rewarded his service by giving him a new, more powerful form in the pocket dimension. Brutus, as players called him, was not just a prison guard in the afterlife. He was the architect of the punishment. He ran the dimension. He enforced the loop. And the phrase he shouts in the Apothecon language, Nethurgas Lorozo, Abugneth. Abugneth translates roughly to gather blood, feed, feed, feed. He was there to collect something, not just to stop escapes. The number that changes everything. In Mob of the Dead, there is a number counter on the wall near the elevator that players can interact with. If you enter the number 115, the element number, into this panel, something happens. Brutus can be heard whispering "not this time," or maybe next time, in a hushed, almost intimate tone. The counter then changes from 115 to 666. It slowly shifts back to normal as if nothing happened, and the interaction cannot be repeated within the same game. This Easter egg serves no mechanical purpose. It gives no reward. It simply exists to confirm that the two key numbers in the Zombies franchise, 115 and 666, the element and the symbol, are aware of each other within the fiction of this map. Brutus's reaction is the most disturbing part. He sounds less like an enemy guard and more like someone who has seen this happen many times before. Someone who anticipated the attempt and was mildly entertained by it. The casual, private quality of his whisper, "not this time," implies a familiarity with the players trying this that shouldn't be possible for a character who exists within the game's fiction. It's one of those small details in Zombies that rewards attention with something more unsettling than any jump scare could deliver. The Warden's office knew. In Mob of the Dead, before players understood the map's mythology fully, there were clues hidden in plain sight throughout the Warden's office and the administrative areas of the prison. On the walls were newspaper clippings, and when you examined them closely enough, one in particular stood out. It bore only the word "Gatory" visible on the torn edge of a headline. Half the word was missing, but half was enough. Purgatory. The office also contained a picture of lightning striking the Golden Gate Bridge. This was foreshadowing embedded in the environment years before players had a complete enough understanding of the lore to decode it. The bridge where Icarus crashes, where the Pack-a-Punch machine is located, the place the four mobsters reach in every cycle only to crash and die again. Regulation 666 can also be found posted on the prison walls. A regulation that reads, "They are not your friends." An instruction addressed almost certainly to Weasel, the man whose trust in his partners literally got him killed. The map told you everything you needed to know before you understood a word of it. The celebrities who didn't know they were part of it. Call of the Dead is the only map in Zombies history to feature real-world celebrities as its playable cast, and the lore context surrounding their involvement is extraordinary. Robert Englund, Sarah Michelle Gellar, Michael Rooker, and Danny Trejo are all playing themselves. Actors who were making a film on a remote Siberian island with director George A. Romero when the zombie outbreak occurred. Their in-game characters behave exactly as famous actors who suddenly find themselves in a real horror movie might behave. Shocked, darkly comedic, increasingly competent as survival instincts override celebrity. But the reason the location matters is critical. The Siberian island where Romero was shooting his film was a Group 935 facility. The same organization that had been conducting Element 115 experiments across the globe. The zombies on the island had red eyes that indicated they were under Samantha's control. Somewhere in the facility, locked behind a wall, were the four members of the Ultimis crew, Dempsey, Nikolai, Takeo, and Richtofen, who had been shot forward in time again and were now trapped. The celebrities, entirely by accident, helped them escape by retrieving the golden rod, a critical artifact that Richtofen needs for his grand scheme. Sarah Michelle Gellar and Danny Trejo inadvertently advanced the plans of a mad German scientist toward the destruction of Earth. George Romero was canonized and then honored. The boss of Call of the Dead is George A. Romero himself, the real-world director of Night of the Living Dead, the man who essentially invented the modern zombie genre as we understand it. In the Zombies universe, Romero was on the island directing a film when he was exposed to Element 115, transforming him into a massive, luminous, deeply angry zombie boss who staggers around the map swinging a spotlight pole and absorbing enormous amounts of damage. The irony of the father of zombie cinema becoming a zombie himself was not lost on Treyarch, and the tribute was designed with obvious affection. Romero is not played for mockery. He is depicted as powerful, terrifying, and iconic, a boss worthy of his legacy. When Romero passed away in real life in 2017, Treyarch paid tribute a second time in Tag der Toten, the final map of the Ether saga, which is a reimagining of Call of the Dead. Romero doesn't appear in Tag der Toten as a boss, but his presence is honored throughout the map's environmental storytelling and audio logs, with the developers using the map as both a farewell to the Ether storyline and a quiet, meaningful goodbye to the man who made all of it possible. Shangri-La trapped two adventurers forever. Hidden in the background lore of Shangri-La, the map set in a mystical Himalayan jungle shrine, are two characters who never appear in the game directly, but whose fate is more disturbing than almost anything that happens to the playable crew. Brock and Gary were adventurers and explorers who discovered Shangri-La before the Ultimus crew arrived. They stumbled onto the shrine, began documenting its mysteries, and then the zombies came. The Ultimus crew, traveling through time to reach the shrine in search of the focusing stone Richtofen needs for his grand scheme, actually encounters Brock and Gary mid-expedition, rescues them from a zombie encounter, only for the time loop inherent to Shangri-La's structure to reset everything, sending Brock and Gary back to the beginning of their expedition with no memory of being saved. Richtofen and the crew have to interact with Brock and Gary repeatedly throughout the Easter egg, using the time loop to their advantage. But Brock and Gary never get to leave. The shrine has trapped them. Every time the loop resets, they start again. They will never stop exploring the shrine that is consuming them. They will never find a way out. The focusing stone leaves with the crew. Brock and Gary stay behind. The souls in Shangri-La were there before anyone. Shangri-La is not simply a zombie map. It is a sacred location, and the zombies inhabiting it are not mindless German soldiers or Japanese Imperial Army casualties. They are ancient, monks and pilgrims and guardians who were in Shangri-La long before Group 935 ever existed, long before Element 115 was discovered by modern science. The map's visual design tells this story quietly. The zombies wear robes. Their faces are different from the military zombies of earlier maps, and the architecture is ancient in a way that predates everything the organized research groups were building in the 1940s. The implication is that Shangri-La was one of those places where the boundary between the physical world and the ether was always thin, that the element was present here naturally, that the supernatural energy of the location had been attracting the dead and reanimating them long before Richtofen needed to visit. He arrived at an ecosystem of undead that had been running without him for centuries. The focusing stone he came to claim was being guarded by things that were never his to disturb. The infinity of moon. The moon map is where the Ultimus saga ends, and its finale is so cosmically destructive that it's easy to lose the smaller darkness inside it. Richtofen's grand scheme, the plan that everything from Sher Nonuma forward had been building toward, required him to fuse together the golden rod and the focusing stone, use them to power up the moon pyramid device, and then swap consciousnesses with Samantha. The swap works. Richtofen enters the MPD and takes control of the zombie hordes. Samantha finds herself in Richtofen's body, stranded, powerless. Dempsey, Nikolai, and Takeo, manipulated by Maxis, fire missiles at Earth. The planet is shattered. Richthofen, now controlling only the zombies on the moon and whatever is left alive on Earth, has achieved his goal and simultaneously watched it become meaningless. There is no human race to dominate, no world to rule. He is king of a ruin. And somewhere in Richthofen's original body, in the physical form of the mad German doctor, Samantha Maxis is trapped, alive, conscious, watching the Earth burn from the moon. She stays in his body for over 10 years. The shadows of evil characters were all sinners by design. The 4 playable characters in Shadows of Evil, the 1940s Morgue City map that opens Black Ops 3's Zombies storyline, were not chosen randomly. Each of them was selected by the Shadow Man specifically because of something terrible in their past. Nero Blackstone was a magician who had his rival murdered. Jessica Rose was a femme fatale who used men and discarded them. Floyd Campbell was a boxer who threw fights for the mob. Jack Vincent was a corrupt detective. They are not heroes who were in the wrong place at the wrong time. They are flawed people who were found guilty by something older than human justice and recruited into a ritual they don't understand. The entire map is a ceremony. The 4 of them completing sacrificial rituals in different districts of Morgue City to open seals, building the Apothecon's servant wonder weapon, and eventually confronting the Shadow Man, who had intended to use their actions to free the Apothecons into the world. The map's Cthulhu-influenced aesthetic is not incidental. The Apothecons are explicitly based on H.P. Lovecraft's Elder Gods, ancient entities of chaos and consumption, and Morgue City is their attempt to claw through the skin of the world. The plane from Alcatraz keeps flying. One of the more haunting connective details between Black Ops 2 and Black Ops 3 concerns the Icarus, the handmade plane that Weasel designed for the mob of the Dead Crew's escape attempt. In the Shadows of Evil Easter egg, during the major quest sequence called The Beginning of the End, players who look at the right moment in the right direction can see a plane flying in the distance over Morgue City. It is the Icarus. It is not a different plane that resembles it. It is specifically, deliberately, the Icarus, crossing the sky of a 1940s American city, while 4 sinners in the streets below are completing rituals to seal away a cosmic horror. The Alcatraz pocket dimension and Morgue City occupy different coordinates in the Zombies multiverse, but they share a sky in that one moment. The Icarus's appearance in Shadows of Evil is a breadcrumb, a connection between the intimate purgatory story of 4 dead mobsters and the grand cosmic mythology of the Apothecons, reminding attentive players that these are not isolated stories, but interconnected pieces of something much larger. The ciphers in Shadows of Evil told you where to go next. Among the secrets embedded in Shadows of Evil are scattered notes and ciphers written by Richthofen, Primus Richthofen, the younger version from Dimension 63, who had arrived in Morgue City ahead of the 4 playable characters to manipulate events. These notes, when decoded, reveal 4 sets of coordinates. Those coordinates correspond to 4 locations: Lower Silesia, Hohenwerfen Castle, Pompeii Island, and Volgograd. These are the settings of the next 4 Black Ops 3 maps: Der Eisendrache, Zetsubu no Shima, and Gorod Krovi. And together, they form the path Primus would take to collect the souls of their Ultimes counterparts. Treyarch had embedded the entire map release order for the next year of DLC into the starting map's hidden codes, waiting for the community to decode it. Players found the ciphers within hours. The community spent days decoding them. when the dead Eisendrache trailer dropped and the castle in the Austrian Alps appeared on screen. The forums erupted with people who recognized the coordinates from Shadows of Evil months before the map arrived. The Iron Dragon was a real castle. The Eisendrache, which translates from German as the Iron Dragon, is set in an Austrian mountain castle that is clearly modelled on Hohenwerfen Castle, a real medieval fortress perched on a cliff top in the Austrian Alps. In the lore, the castle is a Group 935 facility that was repurposed for research into ancient Keeper artifacts. The supernatural energy that predates Group 935 and Element 115 by millennia. The castle's battlements have been modified with rocket launch infrastructure, which is where the map's central Easter egg begins. Stopping a rocket that carries Ultimus Dempsey in a cryopod from reaching the moon and Group 935's Griffin Station. The dragons that circle the castle in later rounds and can be directed using the map's trap system are not fantasy creatures dropped into a COD game. According to lore, Group 935 acquired dragon research from Division 9, the Japanese counterpart to Group 935, and successfully deployed biological weapons in the form of draconic creatures during the war. In a different dimension, the Agonia Fracture, one of the fractured timelines created by Primus's interference. Dragons were deployed at the Battle of Stalingrad, where the Soviet forces used stolen Group 935 research to build giant robots to fight them. Takeo's emperor had him tortured. The revelation about Takeo Masaki in Zetsubu. Noshima is one of the darkest individual character moments in Zombies history. The island map reveals, through audio logs and cutscene dialogue, that after every successful military mission Takeo completed, every battle won, every honor earned, every act of valor that elevated him in the eyes of Japan's military, the emperor had him secretly taken away and subjected to inhumane experiments, not as punishment, as maintenance. Takeo was too valuable to leave at his natural level of capability, and the emperor wanted to understand what made him extraordinary. The experiments were described as brutal. Takeo endured them because he believed in loyalty above all things, because the emperor was divine, because to question the experiments would be to question the order of the universe as he understood it. He was feared by the emperor himself. The man performing the experiments was afraid of the subject he was studying. When Primus Takeo arrives at the island and encounters Ultimus Takeo, he learns all of this, and rather than leave his older self to continue existing in that cycle of abuse and experimentation, he offers him a mercy. Ultimus Takeo, finally understanding the truth of his existence, accepts. Primus Takeo performs the act of seppuku on his behalf and then beheads him, an honorable death, ending a life of honorable suffering. The soul goes into the summoning key. The island continues burning around them. The poisoning was always the plan. At the conclusion of Tag der Toten, the final map of the Ether story arc, set in a reimagining of Call of the Dead, Primus and Ultimus and Victis, all three crews assembled together after years and dimensions of separation, celebrate in a forest. They have, together, broken the cycle. Dr. Monty, who had been playing both sides for the entire saga, a keeper who became obsessed with control, has been destroyed. The multiverse's infinite loop has been halted. Everyone is drinking around a fire, and then Primus Nikolai, quietly, without announcement, poisons the drinks. Everyone dies. This is not a betrayal. It was Nikolai's plan all along, and Richthofen had known about it, and had handed Nikolai the Chronorium, the prophetic book documenting the multiverse's events, specifically because he didn't have the strength to do what had to be done. To send everything related to element 115, the keepers and the apothecons, into the dark ether and seal it away. The people connected to those forces had to be removed from the new universe. Primus and Ultimus were bound to the ether by Richtofen's original soul-binding experiment. They couldn't live in the clean universe they had created. They had to die to build it. Nikolai, the drunk, the comic relief, the man whose vodka dependency was written into his DNA by element 115 experiments, was the one who understood this clearly enough to act on it. He poisoned his friends to give them a better world they would never see. Dr. Monty was never on anyone's side. Dr. Monty presents himself throughout the Black Ops 3 Zombies narrative as a benevolent paternal figure, a keeper who has transcended his origins and exists now as something almost divine, looking after the multiverse's well-being, guiding the crews through their missions with warmth and encouragement. His house, where the child versions of Dempsey, Nikolai, Takeo, and Richtofen live safely during the events of Primus's missions, feels like a refuge from the chaos. But the truth of Monty, revealed across the later stages of the storyline, is that he had been enforcing the cycle that was destroying the multiverse. The infinite loop that Primus was trying to break. The recursive nightmare where the same events happen over and over, where the same people make the same choices, where no version of history ever breaks free, was maintained by Monty. He wanted the cycle to continue because within the cycle, he held something close to omnipotence. He had also been corrupted by the dark ether, the same force that corrupted Richtofen when he touched the MPD, the same force that had turned the Shadow Man from a keeper into a cosmic predator. He and the Shadow Man had once been close. They became the opposing faces of a failed relationship between beings who forgot how to be good. When Primus and Ultimus finally moved against him, Monty revealed the full extent of his control, including wiping Maxis from existence when he stopped being useful. He had done this before, multiple times, to multiple versions of people. He simply didn't mention it. The Dark Ether had been there since the beginning. The Dark Ether, the parallel dimension that serves as the central threat of the Black Ops Cold War-era Zombies storyline, is not a new concept introduced in 2020. It is present in the Ether saga from the very beginning, mentioned but unnamed, implied but never fully confronted. When Richtofen touched the Moon Pyramid device and began hearing voices, he was making contact with the Dark Ether. When the Shadow Man speaks in shadows of evil, he is an entity of the Dark Ether. When the Apothecons attempt to break through the dimensional barriers in the Ether story, they are pushing from inside the Dark Ether outward. The difference in Cold War Zombies mode is that humanity, in the form of Nazi scientists at Project N Station in Poland, the same region where the real Der Riese was located, accidentally tore a hole directly into it, not using ancient artifacts or element 115 accumulated over decades, but with a modern particle accelerator experiment gone catastrophically wrong. The rift they created was sealed by Soviet forces after the war, hidden and classified. And then, in 1983, Omega Group broke the seal back open to harvest Ethereum, a more powerful, more unstable successor substance to element 115. Everything that came after was a consequence of the same pattern. Science reaching into something it could not control, something that had been waiting, patient and hungry, for someone to open the door. The grief in Gorod Krovi, the Stalingrad map from Black Ops, 3's third DLC, is set inside one of the most catastrophically destructive real-world battles in human history, the Battle of Stalingrad, which claimed an estimated 2 million lives between 1942 and 1943. The Zombies version of Stalingrad layers a second catastrophe on top of that already staggering death toll. Dragons deployed by Division 9, giant Soviet mechs constructed from stolen Group 935 research, and a fractured dimensional rift bleeding zombie hordes into the ruins. The audio logs scattered through Gorod Krovi document the reactions of Soviet soldiers who survived the real battle's worst days, only to watch something impossible descend on top of it. They don't sound frightened by the dragons. They sound resigned, as if surviving everything history threw at them made the supernatural feel like just one more thing to endure. The revelation that broke Nikolai. In Gorod Krovi, when Primus Nikolai encounters Ultimus Nikolai, the exchange between the two versions of himself is one of the franchise's most quietly devastating moments. Primus Nikolai is sober, purposeful, carrying the weight of what he knows must happen. Ultimus. Nikolai is a man whose wives are numbered like casualties. Richthofen's logs confirm he has had multiple, their fates unspecified but implied. When Primus Nikolai prepares to kill his older self, he does not do it with contempt. He does it with a grief that suggests he is killing something he recognizes. The soul extraction sequence in Gorod Krovi is not triumphant. It is two versions of the same broken man, sitting on either side of a divide that cannot be crossed. One of them finally laying down the pain the other has been carrying for decades. The hidden orchestra in the shadows. The musical scores of Kevin Sherwood, who composed and performed the majority of Zombies' Easter egg songs throughout the franchise, contain lyrics written in Apothicon, the invented language of the extra-dimensional Apothicon entities. Songs like Not Ready to Die, 115, and Coming Home all contain coded messages that, when translated using cipher keys that the community gradually assembled across years of games, reveal pieces of the storyline that were never spoken in dialogue. 115 contains passages that describe the Moon Pyramid device's activation from Samantha's perspective. Not Ready to Die is widely understood to be a direct address from Samantha to the crew, and several lines decode to descriptions of what the ether feels like from inside it. The songs were never marketed as lore documents. They were marketed as Easter egg rewards. The mythology embedded in them was always hiding inside lyrics most players never stopped to look at closely. Division 9 and the Empire's experiments. While Group 935 was Germany's foremost supernatural research division, Japan had its own program. Division 9, operating out of Shinonuma and other Pacific Theater locations. Division 9 focused on biological enhancement and biological weaponization, conducting experiments that ran parallel to but distinct from Group 935's Element 115 work. Their research into dragons, specifically into whether the dragon specimens they had obtained could be weaponized for military deployment, was the project that eventually spread to the Gorod Krovi dimension. The collaboration between Group 935 and Division 9 was formalized, but uneasy. Both organizations were ultimately serving the same wartime objectives, but their methodologies were incompatible, and their leadership distrusted each other. What survived of Division 9's research after the war ended up in Soviet hands, which is how Stalingrad in the fractured timeline ended up with the specific combination of dragons and Soviet mechs that defines Gorod Krovi's battlefield. The origins of the Apothicons. The Apothicons, the ancient extra-dimensional entities whose attempted incursion drives the cosmological threat of the Zombies series, were once Keepers. The Keepers were the original guardians of the multiverse, custodial beings who maintained the balance between dimensions and kept the boundary between the living world and the ether stable. Some Keepers, exposed to the dark ether long enough, were corrupted utterly, their nature inverted. They became the Apothicons, consumers rather than guardians, entities that no longer maintained dimensional boundaries but actively sought to dissolve them, to fold all existence into the dark ether where they resided. This origin story, good things turn monstrous by prolonged exposure to something corrosive, mirrors almost exactly what Element 115 does to humans. What happened to the Apothicons over cosmic timescales happens to ordinary people within years. The theme running through every layer of the Zombies franchise is the same. Things that were meant to preserve become agents of destruction when they touch something they were never designed to touch. The zombie that never was. In the development of World at War's Nazi Zombies mode, there were several zombie variants that were designed, partially implemented, and then cut before the game shipped. One of these was a crawling zombie that had been split at the torso, moving only on its arms, dramatically faster than the standard upright zombie, but incapable of the same damage. This variant would not appear until much later in the franchise's history, eventually becoming the crawler zombies in Black Ops, specifically the ones created by the Gersh device's black holes and by grenade explosions. The several-year gap between the original cut design and its eventual implementation suggests that Treyarch had been sitting on the variant, waiting for the right mechanical and narrative context to introduce it. The things that don't make it into a Zombies map are often still circling, somewhere in the files, waiting. The buried lore of Origins. Origins, the final Black Ops 2 Zombies map, takes place in France in 1917 during World War I, decades before Group 935 was officially formed. The map reveals that Element 115 was discovered during the Great War, embedded in a meteor that had struck French soil, which drove the excavation that eventually exposed the ancient Keeper temple buried beneath. The 4 playable characters in Origins are the original versions of Richthofen, Dempsey, Nikolai, and Takeo. Premise: before they were ever test subjects, before the experiments, before any of it. The Richthofen of 1917 is not the Richthofen who would later trap Samantha in the MBD. He is younger, idealistic, in his ambition, and being manipulated by an older version of himself who has arrived from the future to set events in motion. The Origin staffs, 4 elemental weapons built from ancient Keeper technology, are the most powerful weapons in the map, and they exist because the Keepers buried them there thousands of years ago, anticipating that someone would one day need them. The giant robots of Origins. 3 enormous robotic machines called Odin, Thor, and Freyr walk slowly and endlessly through the Origins map, periodically crushing sections of the battlefield underfoot. If a player is standing in certain marked areas when a robot's foot descends, they are killed instantly. These robots are not explained by the map's narrative. They simply exist, vast and indifferent, their purpose unclear within the immediate fiction of the map. The deeper lore establishes them as ancient Keeper constructs, mechanisms that were here before humanity discovered the 115 deposit. Their names, taken from the Norse pantheon, tie them to a broader mythological thread woven through the Zombies series. The suggestion that what humans across history perceived as gods were actually Keepers or Keeper-built machines. and that the supernatural experiences that generated entire religious traditions were really encounters with the dimensional machinery the Keepers left behind. The library no one could fully read. The Chronorium is a book that appears in the Black Ops 3 Zombies storyline as both a plot device and a thematic symbol. It is a prophetic text, written in the Apothicon language, containing the documented history of every event across every dimension. A complete record of the multiverse's timeline written in the language of the entities who predate that multiverse. Richtofen possesses a copy of the Chronorium, having used it to plan his movements across dimensions and prepare for the specific sequence of events that would eventually allow Primus to break the cycle. He passes it to Nikolai specifically because Nikolai is the one person in the group capable of reading its final pages. Capable, presumably, because of what Element 115 did to his mind, which opened perceptual channels that wouldn't otherwise exist. The Chronorium told them all how this had to end. It told them about the poison, and still, they gathered around the fire together. Richtofen's first victim was a child, the Black Ops. 3 Zombies timeline documents include an entry that is easy to miss, but nearly impossible to forget once found. Before the events of Origins, before Richtofen joined Group 935, before the Great War, Richtofen conducted his first recorded experiment on a live subject. The subject was a child. The nature of the experiment is not fully described in available lore, but it is referenced in a way that makes the deliberate vagueness feel more disturbing than any explicit description would. This detail is part of why Richtofen's Black Ops 3 arc, in which he sacrifices everything to ensure a clean universe for children who will never know his name, reads as genuine redemption rather than performance. He knew what he was. He spent the rest of his existence trying to build something that cancelled it out. Victis and the Aftermath. While Primus was navigating the deeper cosmological conflict of the Ether storyline, a second crew, Victis, was experiencing a quieter, slower tragedy in the same universe. Comprised of Samuel Stuhlinger, Martin Johnson, Russman, and Abigail Misty Briarton. Victis were survivors of the zombie apocalypse on the shattered Earth. The Earth that Maxis destroyed by firing the moon's missiles. They had no access to wonder weapons or pack-a-punch machines until they found them. They had no grand destiny or prophetic mission. They were just 4 survivors on a broken planet, moving from map to map trying not to die, occasionally being used as pawns by Maxis and Richtofen in their continuing conflict. Stuhlinger had eaten human flesh to survive at some point before the game begins, a detail mentioned in his dialogue as trauma he cannot escape, and had developed a connection to Richtofen's voice as a result of the 115 exposure this entailed. He was compromised, unreliable, barely functional, and he was somehow the most important member of the crew to the Ether's competing forces. The safe house in the sky, the giant, the Black Ops. 3 remake of Der Riese added new audio logs to the map that weren't present in the original World at War version. Among the most haunting of these additions is a log made by a Group 935 scientist named Dr. Groff, who was stationed at Griffin Station on the Moon. Groff's logs document the period immediately after Maxis locked Samantha in the MTD chamber. The chaos of her screaming, the uncertainty about what had happened, and Richtofen's cold, systematic response to the situation. What makes the logs extraordinary is that Groff was clearly not a villain. He was a scientist who was horrified by what he was witnessing, but whose horror had no mechanism for expression, no authority to appeal to, no chain of command that prioritized the welfare of a child over the continuation of the research. He documented atrocities in the clinical language of someone who had no other language available to them. The excavation that started everything. The ancient keeper structure buried beneath the Origins excavation site in France was not discovered by accident. According to the lore embedded in the Origins loading screens and audio logs, a German command structure became aware of unusual readings beneath the Somme battlefield and directed excavation specifically because of those readings. The soldiers assigned to dig were told they were looking for strategic resources. When they broke through to the keeper structure, the underground temple complex that predated human civilization by thousands of years, and the 115 crystals were exposed, the first effects began within hours. The first reports of the dead moving came from soldiers who had died in the morning's fighting. By evening, Command had realized they had found something that could not be controlled. The research apparatus that would eventually become Group 935 was assembled in response to what was found in that trench. The entire 20-year catastrophe that consumed the franchise's first major storyline began with a dig in wartime France that was looking for something else entirely. The flowers on every map, a small, easy-to-miss detail scattered across multiple zombies' maps, is a flower. Specifically, a flower that appears in the environments with no obvious mechanical purpose. The flower is Forget-Me-Not, a blue wildflower whose name carries obvious symbolic weight in a franchise about cycles of memory loss, about people who cannot remember who they are or what they've done. Samantha had a vase of forget-me-nots in her room at Der Riese. After her fusion with the MPD, the flower began appearing in other maps, in window boxes at Kino der Toten, growing through cracks in the verruckt floor, pressed flat between pages of a journal at Shinonuma. Nobody placed them deliberately in any narrative sense. They simply appear wherever Samantha's influence is present, which means they appear almost everywhere. They are her grief made botanical, the memory of a little girl scattered across the architecture of every map she ever haunted. The monkey bombs were someone's creation. The monkey bomb, the wind-up cymbal-banging toy that, when thrown, plays a jingle and attracts zombies before exploding, is one of the most beloved tactical items in the franchise. Its in-universe origin is Richthofen's research notes, where it is described as a modification of a child's toy that Samantha had brought into the Der Riese facility. The toy was weaponized using element 115, which gave its mechanical movements a supernatural attraction for the undead that the researchers eventually recognized and formalized as a tactical device. In Richthofen's notes, his description of acquiring and modifying the toy contains no acknowledgement that it belonged to a child who was being kept in a research facility where human corpses were being reanimated. The mundane horror of turning a little girl's toy into a zombie-attracting grenade, documented in the same clinical tone as all of Richthofen's other research, is exactly the kind of detail that defines the franchise's approach to darkness, hiding it in plain sight, inside something that players find funny. The Ascension program. Ascension, the Black Ops Zombies map, set at a Soviet cosmodrome, provides one of the most direct connections between the zombies lore and real-world Cold War history. The map is set at Baikonur Cosmodrome in Kazakhstan, a facility that genuinely existed as the Soviet Union's primary rocket launch site, the place from which Sputnik was launched in 1957 and from which Yuri Gagarin became the first human in space in 1961. In the Zombies universe, Baikonur was simultaneously operating as a legitimate space program and as a Soviet continuation of Group 935's research, using captured Nazi scientists who had been spirited out of Germany by Soviet intelligence rather than American intelligence, a direct parallel to Operation Paperclip, the real American program that recruited Nazi scientists after the war. The space race in the Zombies universe was at least partially driven by competing attempts to get to the moon before the other side could access Griffin Station and the Moon Pyramid device. The space monkeys of Ascension. The special enemies in Ascension are the space monkeys, primate test subjects launched into orbit as part of the Soviet space program, now reanimated and hostile, attacking the perk machines to disable them. This sounds comedic, and the game plays it as such, but the real-world space programs of both the United States and the Soviet Union genuinely used monkeys and primates as test subjects before human spaceflight was attempted, and many of those animals died during testing. The Ascension monkeys are reanimated casualties of the actual space program, resurrected by the same 115 contamination that was spreading through the Cosmodrome's facilities. They don't attack the players, they attack the perk machines. The implication in the law is that the machine's energy signatures resemble whatever they were trained to interact with during testing, that the reanimation process preserved enough muscle memory to make them respond to technological stimuli, even in death. They are tragic and surreal simultaneously, which is the franchise's default register. Richtofen's diary and the hands. It passed through. The diary that Richtofen lost during the Der Riese teleporter accident in 1945, the one containing every detail of his grand scheme, passed through at least 4 sets of hands before the events of Black Ops 2. Soviet intelligence recovered it first. A CIA operative named Cornelius Purnell, who had been monitoring Group 935 since before the war, obtained a copy. The CIA used Richtofen's research as the foundation for their own element, 115 investigation program, which was classified under the codename Mkultra in official government documents, a designation that shares its name with the real CIA program of the same era, a detail that is either coincidental or deeply intentional. The diary's contents eventually reached Division 9 remnants and later the Black Ops 2 era intelligence apparatus. It is the document that most directly enabled everything after Der Riese. The recipe for every catastrophe that followed, written in a mad scientist's handwriting and lost on the way out of a teleporter. The real Richtofen voice. Nolan North, who voiced Richtofen from Black Ops onward, has spoken in interviews about how he approached the character, specifically about how Richtofen's madness had to feel earned rather than performed, the difference between a character who is playing at being unhinged and one whose damage runs through everything he says. In the original World at War version of the character, voiced by a different actor, Richtofen was more broadly cartoonish. The accent exaggerated, the cruelty played for comedy. North's interpretation deepened the character significantly, introducing a register of genuine intellectual pleasure in suffering that made Richtofen's later redemption arc feel more meaningful. A character who was always performing his evil is harder to redeem than one whose evil was real. The voice change between World at War and Black Ops was not just a casting shift. It was a tonal recalibration that changed what Richtofen was capable of as a narrative figure. The Ghosts of Transit, the map that opened Black Ops 2's Zombies mode, is set in a post-apocalyptic American landscape after the Earth's surface has been shattered by the moon missiles. It is widely considered among the most mechanically frustrating Zombies maps ever released. The fog that reduces visibility, the denizens that attach to your face in the dark, the enormous bus that is your only real method of transportation across the outdoor sections. But the environmental storytelling embedded in transit is genuinely rich. The American landscape it depicts, diners, bus depots, power stations, is recognizable as the everyday world, now destroyed and reclaimed by a post-apocalyptic ecology. The implication is that ordinary American civilians, people who had no connection to Group 935, or the Illuminati, or the Keepers, simply woke up one morning to find that the ozone layer was gone, and the dead were walking. Transit's frustrations as a game experience accidentally serve its horror premise. This is what survival feels like. Uncomfortable, underpowered, navigating a world that actively resists you, moving through fog you can never fully see through. The bus driver is all that's left. The bus driver, the automated mechanical figure who runs the bus route in transit regardless of the zombie apocalypse, stopping at each station, waiting a beat, and moving on, is one of the franchise's most quietly eerie presences. He never acknowledges the players beyond a few automated phrases. He never reacts to the zombies. He simply drives his route, as he was programmed to drive it, with complete indifference to the fact that civilization has ended around him. In the lore, the bus driver is one of several automated systems that continued functioning after the moon missiles hit, because they were designed to operate without human oversight. He is, in a sense, the last functioning piece of the pre-apocalypse infrastructure. A robot completing a route that has no more purpose, stopping at stations that have no more passengers, while the people around him fight desperately to survive. He is automation persisting past the point of relevance. He outlasted everything and means nothing. Buried and the Western Town, the Black Ops. 2 Zombies map Buried takes place in an underground Western town, which exists, improbably, directly beneath a British colonial estate in southern Africa. The town, established in the late 1800s, was abandoned and sealed underground when a 115 meteor impacted nearby, and the subsequent supernatural activity made the surface uninhabitable. The townspeople who didn't escape in time either died and reanimated, or went mad and eventually died. When Victors arrives, centuries later, the town has been preserved in near-perfect condition by the sealed, climate-controlled underground environment. The detail that makes this map quietly disturbing is not the zombies, but the evidence of how the town ended. Furniture pushed against doors, windows barricaded from inside rooms with no other exits, a children's school with all the small desks still in their rows. The town was sealed from within. The people inside didn't run. They barricaded themselves in and waited for something to stop. It never stopped. The giant in Buried, the giant character in Buried, the enormous, non-hostile entity named Arthur, who assists players if they give him candy, represents one of the Zombies franchise's most unusual gameplay mechanics. Arthur will smash zombies, clear paths, and destroy obstacles for players who have earned his cooperation. He is childlike in his emotional responses, easily satisfied by small gestures, quick to become distressed when threatened. The lore surrounding Arthur suggests he was a resident of the Western town who survived the initial outbreak, but underwent extreme physical mutation from prolonged 115 exposure. His size, his docility, his reduced cognitive function, all consistent with the element's documented effects on human subjects at high doses over long periods. He is, in a sense, what everyone in the town might have become if they'd survived long enough. He is the town's survivor, its last living resident, thousands of feet underground, helping strangers kill the corpses of people he once knew. in exchange for something sweet. The horrors beneath Alcatraz's cells, in the lower levels of Mob of the Dead, accessible only during specific phases of the map's Easter egg, there are areas that are not part of the normal prison layout, spaces that couldn't have been part of any human construction because they precede human construction. Stone passages with apothecon writing carved into the walls, chambers that appear to have been ritual spaces long before the prison was built on top of them. The implication is that Alcatraz was not chosen as the location for the supernatural punishment pocket dimension because the warden made it available. It was chosen because the location itself was already significant, already a site where the boundary between the physical world and the dark ether was thin for reasons that had nothing to do with 1930s American penal architecture. The prison was built on a place that was already a door. The frozen soldiers of Der Eisendrache. One of the quieter, harder to notice environmental details in Der Eisendrache is the number of bodies frozen in the castle's walls and stone surfaces. Soldiers who appear to have been mid-movement when they were encased. They are not zombie corpses. They are not casualties of the current outbreak. They are men frozen in the act of doing something. Reaching, running, trying to close a door. The lore context is Group 935's cryogenic research conducted at the castle alongside their Keeper artifact work. Some freezing experiments succeeded better than intended. The soldiers encased in the castle walls did not die immediately. The castle stone absorbed them slowly. Whether they froze before or after losing consciousness is not something the game specifies, which is the correct choice. The stars that aren't stars. In Der Eisendrache, during certain lighting conditions at night, the sky above the castle reveals star formations that do not correspond to any known constellation. They are not stylistic choices or casual background details. The star patterns are apothecon symbols, the same symbols that appear on the walls of the underground keeper structures, the same symbols that appear in the apothecon servant wonder weapons activation sequence, the same symbols that correspond to letters in the apothecon alphabet that the community has spent years decoding. The sky above the castle is watching. Whatever the keepers buried there, they marked it from space as well as from underground. The castle sits at the intersection of two coordinate systems, one architectural, one astronomical, and both are written in the language of beings who were never human. The real weight of Shangri-La's traps, the trap systems in Shangri-La, the spike walls, the jet burners, the minecart system, are not designed as gameplay conveniences. They are defensive systems installed by the original inhabitants of the shrine to prevent what is now happening. Outsiders entering and disturbing the sacred site. The monks who built Shangri-La understood the nature of the 115 present in the earth there, and rather than treat it as a resource, they treated it as a hazard requiring permanent containment and guard. Their traps were meant to deter not just the undead, but anyone who came seeking the supernatural power the shrine contained. The focusing stone was not left there carelessly. It was placed there by the keepers and guarded by those who understood what it was well enough to build their entire civilization around protecting it. Richthofen walked in and took it within a few hours of arriving. The numbers that killed Dimitri. Before Kino der Toten, before the Ultimis crew's journey through the established maps, there is a canonical zombies event that is mentioned in lore but never directly playable. The destruction of a Soviet research installation called the Kino Facility. This facility, which served as a Group 935 research outpost in Russia, was the first location where Soviet scientists had successfully used the matter transference device. The test subject was a Soviet soldier named Dmitry Volkov. He was placed inside the device. The device activated. Dmitry arrived at his destination in pieces. Specifically, the specific pieces were scattered across a radius of approximately 40 meters. The test was considered a failure, which seems self-evident. Group 935's records note this without any emotional register. Dmitry existed in the records as test subject number 263, and the next log entry is about recalibrating the device's field harmonics. The voice behind the numbers. In the Black Ops campaign, the character known as the Numbers, the radio broadcast that drives the game's conspiracy plot, is connected to the zombies storyline through a figure named Cornelius Pernell. Pernell was a CIA agent who had been monitoring Group 935 since the 1940s, who had obtained Richthofen's research diary, and who had become increasingly contaminated by his own exposure to 115 through his proximity to the materials he was cataloguing. By the events of the Black Ops 2 Zombies storyline, Pernell has been transformed, consumed by his exposure to the element in a way that mirrors what happened to Richthofen when he touched the MPD. He is no longer an intelligence operative. He is something the 115 made of the intelligence operative, pursuing goals that were no longer entirely his own. The numbers station he operated was broadcasting coordinates and activation codes to sleeper agents who were themselves 115 compromised. The conspiracy that drives the campaign is a zombies conspiracy. The two modes have always been the same story. The grief inside Abracadav, the Easter egg song for Call of the Dead. Abracadav, performed by Elena Siegman, contains lyrics that read as a conversation between the undead and the living, with the undead voice describing the experience of reanimation as a kind of violent disorientation rather than a peaceful transformation. The line, "I can't see what I can't find, I can't feel what isn't mine," is widely interpreted by the community as the subjective experience of a zombie, a creature whose body is moving and acting on signals it doesn't recognize as its own, that retains some fragment of awareness, but has lost the ability to direct its own movement. If correct, this interpretation transforms every zombie in every map from a mindless enemy into a trapped consciousness, a person experiencing their own posthumous violence from the inside without the ability to stop it. It is never confirmed. It is never denied. The song plays once as a reward for finding the right radios, and then the map continues. The mystery of McLuhan. Dr. Cornelius Pernell's CIA codename. McLuhan is a reference to Marshall McLuhan, the Canadian media theorist famous for coining the phrase, "The medium is the message." The choice of this name for the man who operated a numbers station and eventually became a conduit for 115 influence broadcasting is not incidental. McLuhan's actual theoretical work centered on how the medium through which communication travels shapes and transforms the message being transmitted. That radio doesn't just carry words, but changes the meaning of those words by virtue of being radio. In the zombies context, Pernell/McLuhan was transmitting not just messages, but 115 influence signals, using the medium of Cold War radio broadcasting to transmit activation codes that gradually rewired the minds of the people receiving them. The medium was the weapon. His code name was the entire point. The Pack-a-Punch machine was never explained. For every supernatural element in the Zombies franchise, there is usually at least a cursory lore explanation. Element 115 causes reanimation. The MPD channels ether energy. The teleporters use matter transference technology. The Pack-a-Punch machine which upgrades weapons using what appears to be a combination of intense energy and 115 infusion, has never received a satisfying in-universe explanation. It simply exists in the maps. Characters occasionally comment on it. The upgrade process involves the weapon being fed into a chamber and ejected in an enhanced state. But the mechanics of why a bullet fired from an upgraded weapon does more damage, or why some upgrades give weapons supernatural properties like the Thundergun's air burst or the ray gun's plasma, are never addressed. The most widely accepted fan theory is that the Pack-a-Punch uses Keeper technology to imbue weapons with ether energy directly, that the upgraded weapons are, in a small way, enchanted rather than merely modified. Treyarch has never confirmed this. The three fates, Dempsey, Nikolai, and Takeo, are frequently described in community shorthand as soldiers who ended up in the wrong place. But their biographies, assembled across audio logs, timeline documents, and character dialogue, describe three people who were specifically selected because of what they were, not despite it. Dempsey was chosen because his will was strong. Richthofen's own notes say so. Nikolai was chosen because his psychological profile made him responsive to alcohol-based 115 compounds in ways that other subjects were not. Takeo was chosen because his physical and psychological conditioning, the product of both elite military training and the Emperor's personal experiments, made him an ideal subject for measuring what 115 could do to someone already operating at maximum human capability. They were chosen. Their presence with Richthofen was engineered. The idea that they were soldiers unlucky enough to be captured is a simplification. They were the best available candidates for experiments that had been running toward a specific outcome long before any of them knew the experiment existed. The perk that was cut. Among the Perca-Cola machines designed during the development of the Black Ops Zombies maps, one perk never made it into the retail game. A machine tentatively called Stamina Up, which would have given players increased movement speed and reduced the sprint recovery time before they could shoot again. Stamina Up did eventually appear in later maps, but an earlier and different cut perk called Deadshot Daiquiri, which was also eventually added to the game, was not the only lost candidate. Community investigation of early development screenshots has identified machines that were given names and branding but never given mechanical implementation, suggesting Treyarch designed more perk concepts than they could balance and ship. The franchise's perk system, which players treat as canon and stable, was always a smaller version of something that was going to be larger, and the machines that didn't make the cut are sitting in the same development archive as the zombie variants and the audio files that never played. The zombies that actually shipped was always a curated selection from a larger, stranger space. The fog that guards the truth, the fog in transit, is often cited as the map's most frustrating design element. The thick environmental haze that limits visibility to a few meters outside the bus's route and houses the denizens, small creatures that leap onto players' faces and reduce them to stumbling ineffectiveness. But the fog in transit is not just a visibility limitation. In the lore, it is a direct consequence of the moon missiles. The atmospheric damage caused by the impacts producing sustained particulate matter, dense enough to blanket large sections of North America indefinitely. The fog is the apocalypse made tactile. You cannot see through it, because seeing through it was not designed to be possible. The world ended, and the world ending looked like this. A grey-white haze that stretches to every horizon, within which things you cannot see are moving toward you, and the only way to know you are still on the right path is to stay close to the bus, which is still running. because it was built to run regardless of whether the world it was running through still existed. The grief inside Coming Home, the Easter egg song for Shangri-La, Coming Home, by Elena Siegman, is sung from the perspective of someone who has been separated from the people they love and is trying to find their way back. The song's chorus, "And when they've broken down my walls, when I have nothing left, I'll feel your heartbeat coming home," is widely interpreted as Samantha addressing Maxis. She was inside the MPD. He was dead and then digital. Neither of them was home. The song plays after the completion of Shangri-La's Easter egg, a map about two adventurers trapped in an infinite loop, and it plays for a crew that is also trapped. People who cannot go home because home was destroyed, who are completing a mad scientist's grand scheme because it is the only structure available to them. Coming Home is the franchise's most explicitly emotional Easter egg song, and it plays in a map about people who can never leave. The radio silence after Tag der Toten. Tag der Toten ends with everyone dead and the world clean, and then there is nothing. No post-credits scene, no loading screen with a message, no final audio log. The map is quiet in a way that no previous Zombies ending has been quiet. Every prior ending had a voice. Richthofen's announcing his scheme complete, Maxis instructing the crew, Monty narrating the aftermath. Tag der Toten ends in silence, and the silence is the ending. The absence of a post-game voice means that the demonic announcer is gone. No Samantha, no Richthofen, no Monty. The infrastructure that produced those voices has been dismantled. The new universe doesn't have a demonic announcer because it doesn't have a moon pyramid device, doesn't have the ether architecture, doesn't have the machinery of supernatural control. The silence after Tag der Toten is the sound of a universe that has been returned to itself. No voices in the ether, nothing reaching through the dimensional fabric, just the clean quiet of a world that has been, against all probability, made ordinary again. The dog in the ending. In the Origins ending, the one where Samantha and Eddie are playing with their toys, a dog appears in the room. It is briefly visible, a golden retriever, alive and healthy, sitting near the children. The dog has no dialogue purpose. It serves no function in the scene. It is there because Fluffy, Samantha's dog, who was destroyed in the MTD test, who became the Hellhound mother, whose children players have been killing for the entire franchise's history. In the story Samantha tells her brother, in the world she imagines where things ended well, the dog lived. The toys are the characters. The story is the game. And in the world where the story came out right, where the soldiers won and the girl was safe and the father came home, the dog is sitting in the room with the children, warm and real and alive. It is the franchise's smallest detail and its most complete emotional note. Sitting in the corner of the last scene, not mentioned, just present, the way a happy ending is allowed to be.